This story actually comes from Saudi Arabia or the Arabian Peninsula, and it's an old story. So that's an area kind of in the northeast corner of Africa and borders on to Asia. And it's a story about this, this young man, he's wandering through, and most of that area is desert, but he came across this oasis. And do you know what an oasis is? It's a place in the desert where there's like water and a kind of small lake. And it's very important in the desert because the desert's really dry, so it's where they can drink water and they can feed their animals, usually camels, because people use camels to, travel in the desert. But this young man, he tasted the water, and it was the best water he'd ever tasted. It was just so good. Have you ever had a really good glass of water? Oh, dubious, yes. You see, I come from Scotland, and we're very proud of our tap water. We claim it's the best in the world. I'm not sure it is, but one of the first things I would do whenever I went back home to Scotland was go turn on the tap and drink the water because I just missed, because it was the water I grew up with. And we're lucky in this area, we have good water as well, but some parts you go, it's not very good water. But this young man, he loved this water he found in this oasis. But he had this teacher that was very influential on him. And he thought, I'm going to take some water because I'm going to travel for 3 days and I'm going to take this water and share it with him because this is the best water I've ever tasted. So he gets these kind of leather satchels and he fills it up with water because that's how they transport it. But then he was riding through the desert, and one thing about deserts is it's hot. And one thing about leather, it gets really hot. So the water kind of got a little bit, tasteless, very warm, and what's called putrid. The leather kind of reacted with the water. But he didn't know that. So he finally met his teacher 3 days later. And he said, I brought this water for 3 days. It's the best water I've ever tasted. Please, teacher, this is a gift to you. So the teacher took it. And it didn't taste very good, but the teacher realized, he said, he pretended, that is delicious water. Thank you so much. That is delicious. That is the best water I've ever tasted. And it's like, So the young man left, and the teacher gave the water to one of his other, teachers. And the teacher drank it and spat it out. You're like, that was horrible. That's putrid. Why did you lie to that young man that water was so good? He said, well, you're just tasting the water. What you don't realize is that was a generous gift that young man takes. That's what I tasted. I tasted the gift and the appreciation of that young man for all the effort he went to. And I don't know about you, but sometimes you get gifts from someone and you're kind of like, that's not really what I wanted, or you don't really like. And one thing you could just go, I don't like that. That's probably what I did when I was younger, because I wasn't very polite. But the other thing, if you get a gift, you've got to realize the person went to a lot of effort and thought you would like it. And so we always have to kind of, when you get a gift, to really say, remember the effort that people went to, the generous effort of it, and not just the material gift that you got. So whenever you get a gift, let's be grateful for it, because the person went to a lot of effort. So thank you so much for listening. It's time for your religious education class, and I think I'll be having lunch with some of you later, which I'm looking forward to. So thank you very much for coming up. It's time for your class now.
For my reflection today, I want to talk about generosity, because I see generosity, it's like dessert. It's better if we share. I have a personal philosophy that we have magnificent strengths and spectacular successes in generosity, and some blind spots and difficulties in other areas of generosity. We're not all the same. Maybe you have difficulty volunteering to cold call people about an issue, or to ask someone to take on a new volunteer responsibility, or to join you in speaking before a crowd, or maybe help resolve a problem that they're part of. Well, I have my strengths and weaknesses here, just like each of us, and I thought I would bring that forward a little today. Some things I've had in abundance that had never felt generous giving it away. Energy, planning, logistics, leadership, empathy, those things just flow. I simply did not need to be careful with these qualities for most of my years. Then, of course, I would get myself in hot water with myself around time management, but I would just call on my husband and kids to step in and help out. Sometimes this worked out, and many times there was lots of whinging and grumping along the way. Over the years, I've had to start managing. Over the years, I've had to start managing my volunteerism to do what I could manage on my own, with some cajoling and willing assistance from my DH. That's darling husband, for those of you that read what they call the agony columns, advice columns, DH, Rob. Fortunately, there's been enough of a balance worked out between us that Rob has been mostly available and willing to help out. And the kids grew up and moved out, so that cheap labor has been gone for some time. Well, life moves on. I incurred some physical and emotional limitations, starting with my 2015 concussion. So I had to really face my limits with time and energies. But still, my impulse to volunteer, to lend my talents is very strong. So I started depending more and more on Rob to help me see when I was getting over my head. And also friends. And now I am much better at being more realistic about my time, though Rob still will help me to see it. But I have disappointed myself in my hesitancy around financial generosity, my bête noire, my bugaboo. I have so much emotional baggage around finances and any discussion of finances that any discussion in our household needs to be in the morning, so I have the rest of the day to work off my anxiety about it. And not because Rob is difficult to talk to about it. He really is not. It's because I bring all of that. I have been learning from his calm, sensible approach that he looks at financial needs and ability to help. He simply thinks through what commitments he feels we can make and then carries them out. And we do that together. When our children were growing up and they went off to college, Rob worked it out with them, each of them. What did they need every month? When did they need it? Quarter, month, whatever it was. And he unfailingly made sure that the check was in the mail ahead of time, was moved to the bank on time. The kids totally appreciated that love expressed through the follow-through. He did the same thing and has done the same thing with helping my family in Idaho, who has many needs, and some can be met with financial help. And he's done the same thing with our pledges here at UUFRC. He is wise about it, but also generous. So the emotional baggage that I carry around financial matters can take a back seat, thank you very much, and I can allow our partnership to support me more with my learning new habits. And I can follow the lead in this community where I can lend my hand, my talents, in a way that doesn't ask me to do all the planning and logistics anymore. So I have come to different ones of you and said, thank you so much for what you're doing, because I can follow and lend my hand writing cards or my support or being there when you have made the call. I'm thankful for the family and friends in my life that encourage me to lean into each other. Personally, it's another way that I feel the glue and the strength of our connection in our community. Thank you.
I've been listening to that song quite a lot this week, preparing the service, and I think my family might be fed up hearing it. Fortunately, they like the song. But I was asking myself, I was like, can you be kind without being generous? And can you be generous without being kind? These are the kind of things ministers think about when they're preparing services. It's really quite a boring life. You can't just take something that's beautiful and listen to it. You have to reflect on it and think about, oh, what does that mean? So I've got a conclusion, but I'll come to that at the end. I think the really interesting question is, can you be generous without being kind? I want to explore that, because so much about generosity is giving. And we always associate giving, for the most part, in being a kind gesture. And this month we're exploring the topic of generosity. And we think what generosity is, and then really generosity is a little bit more than being kind, because it's an idea of we make a sacrifice to be generous. Now we can also get great satisfaction for it, but with the generosity there's a giving up of something. And I don't know if you remember when a few months ago I was talking about hospitality, and I was talking about how people when I've experienced real hospitality, people have gone to a lot of trouble to make me feel welcome. And I think there's a little bit of generosity in that. When someone really makes a sacrifice, to give me something, that feels more generous than, if someone's got 24 cookies and they give me one, well, I appreciate it, don't get me wrong, but they've got another 23 cookies there, so it's not that big a sacrifice. Now, if Larry was to give me his only cookie, I'd really appreciate that, but I'd probably give him half back to it. So there's this element of generosity. It's like being kind and caring when it's inconvenient and there's a sacrifice that we have to make. I want to explore, how can we be generous when we're challenged? Because when we've got everything that's plentiful and we're doing well and we're in a good mood and everything's going well, it's kind of easy to be generous then. But can we be generous when we're challenged? When we're trying to get our daughter to do the violin lesson after, where she just doesn't want to go. Can we be kind and generous in those kind of situations? Buddhism really places generosity at the center of the religion. We don't often think about that. We often think of, Buddhism, it's about attachment and suffering, and yes, it is about those. But the words attributed to the Buddha says that if you knew, as I do, the power of giving, you would not let a single meal pass without sharing some of it. Generosity is this powerful for very good reason, because it's characterized by this inner quality of letting go or relinquishing. It reverses the forces that create suffering, because Buddhism feels that suffering is caused by this attachment to material goods, to the impermanent. Buddha goes on to say, it's a profound antidote to the strong habits of clinging, grasping, guarding, and attachment that lead to so much pain and suffering. Generosity brings happiness at every stage of its expression. We experience joy in forming the intention to give. We experience joy in the action of giving, and we experiencing joy in remembering that we have given. And Gandhi once said, the fragrance remains in the hand that gives the rose. The fragrance remains in the hand that gives the rose. And I love that idea that the act of giving stays with us as a joy. So generous acts, when done with love, do bring us happiness and joy. It also brings joy and happiness to the recipient, I hope. And I experienced when the UUFRC Church in San Francisco used to host, when I was a member there, used to host homeless men for 6 weeks. About 60 to 100 homeless men they would shelter there. This was back in the early 2000s. And I remember seeing the joy we'd have in giving. And one of the things we used to do was we'd have the children, when we were 3 years old up to 10-year-old, which actually give these toilet bags with underwear, with hairbrushes, with toothbrush, with soap, and socks in there. And one of the things, because a lot of men who are experiencing homelessness would not often have a chance to interact with children, and some of them may be fathers who were estranged from their children, or maybe their children are growing up, but they would have this great interaction with the children. And I realized that was a generous act to have the children give the toilet bags to the homeless men. There's another thing we did that was that extra step of being generous, because we would give them 2 pairs of underwear and 2 pairs of socks. Why 2 pairs? Well, you can see some real practical aspects of giving people 2 pairs of underwear and 2 pairs of socks, but also allowed these men who are experiencing homeless, to be givers, to be generous, because they could give those socks and underwear to another homeless person. And so that allowed them to be generous. That gave them inherent worth and dignity, because they could be givers and not just recipients as well. And I always remember that idea, like when you give someone something, give them 2 of them, because it allows them to be a giver. What more can we give inherent worth and dignity than allowing other people to be generous? And I always liked that aspect of the homeless, work that the San Francisco Unitarian Universalist Church did. It was actually in the border of the Tenderloin, which is most of us know is experiencing catastrophic homelessness right now. I remember my daughter when she was 3 or 4, she would actually give out the bags, and she loved it, connecting with the men, and the children's choir would sing to the men. And so that was really sweet as well. And they would sing, it was kind of sad in a way, they would sing right before they were about to get food, so they'd have to sit through it politely waiting for the food. But it was a captive audience. But the men loved it. It really felt it was really giving people who are in a really difficult situation, grounding them in their own humanity. But my daughter one time, because we just set up camp beds in the social hall, and that's where the men slept. And my daughter turned to me one point, she was like 3 or 4, and goes, "Where's the pajamas? Why don't the homeless men have pajamas?" And I realized how much I had dehumanized them, like, well, of course they don't have pajamas, they're homeless. She said, "We should really give them pajamas." And I think that's what we need to remember when we're being generous, like how can we really give people as much inherent worth and dignity in the giving? Because generosity goes beyond the material good, it goes beyond the money, it goes beyond giving people dignity, it goes into seeing people for the whole human being they are. And I want to think about this idea of generosity beyond the material good, and think of it as generosity of the heart and generosity of the spirit, because I think that's what Unitarian Universalism is about. How can we be more generous of spirit? How can we be more generous giving from our heart to the heart of another? It's said that a religious person is grateful, and a grateful person is generous. And I know many in this community, and it's often something that people do when they're experiencing grief, is to start a gratitude journal and writing at the end of the day. And most people who do a gratitude journal say at the beginning it's really awkward. Like, "Oh, thank you for my dinner tonight. Thank you for, what really trivial." But they said the more and more they wrote in their gratitude journal, the more they noticed things to be grateful for. So it became an awareness expansion of all the things to be thankful for, of the very gift that life is. And can you put the slide up now, Alex and John? One of the things that we're doing in Unitarian Universalism at the moment is we're looking to replace or add to our 7 principles, and they're looking to replace it with these values. And you can see how they center love at the center of our values. But what they also do, generosity is one of the values. And could you go to the next slide? And this is a back one. Generosity, we cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. That is what they're looking to be ground our faith in as far as generosity. And I think it's really interesting when you see generosity, it links it to gratitude and hope. You know, I said earlier that a religious person is grateful and a grateful person is generous, and it's really connected to it. But also hope. Because I think right now, we heard it during Joys and Sorrows, and we hear it every conversation we have. We look at the state of the world, and it can be really quite hard to find hope right now. So perhaps that gratitude, the gratitude journal, the practice of gratitude can be a step towards generosity, and generosity can be that step towards hope. And Simon Weil, the French philosopher, said that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. And if you actually look at that second sentence in the covenant, we covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our presence as an act of generosity. And I was really thinking about that this week, and you think about when we really listen to someone, that is a generous act. When we listen with curiosity rather than judgment, when we listen with the intention of being kind rather than being right, when we listen to be caring rather than fixing, that's a generous act. So that idea of presence, bringing our full presence to someone as a generous act, that goes beyond any material good. That is a spiritual practice of bringing our full selves to be generous and to truly listen to someone. And we do that in this religious community all the time. We compassionately bring our presence to care for one another, to listen to one another, to take food when they're in need of it, to look after children, for parents who are just at their wits' end. We are here to bring our compassionate presence to each other, and we do it lovingly, caringly, and compassionately. It happens with hugs and touches. We share intimacies with one another, things that we don't have the opportunity to do elsewhere in many of our lives. And it also talked in that we compassionately share our faith. I think that's a challenge to Unitarian Universalism. That kind of creeping into evangelism there, sharing our faith. But what happens if we just share our faith with people outside, with loving listening, with caring? What better statement of our faith could it be than showing someone else love, making them aware of their own inherent worth and dignity when they may be struggling with it themselves, especially someone that we maybe disagree with politically, someone we disagree with religiously, someone who is different from us, someone who may even not like us. Can we still lovingly connect with them, reminding them they are loved and there's nothing they can do about it? They have got inherent worth and dignity, whether they realize it or not. That's how we can share our faith beyond our walls. And Mother Teresa, the Catholic nun, said, "It's not how much we give, but how much love we put into giving." And that's what's up there in the centre of interest right now, which this is up here for November, and I'd like to thank all the people in the Action Sunday who created it, and Laurie McMahon who led that, so thank you, Laurie. It's not how much we give, but how much love we put into the giving. I think that's a great example of what true generosity is. It's not something that's done, a sacrifice that's made with resentment. It's a sacrifice that's made with love. And there's a beautiful story from India, or the continent from India, and it's about this woman she's walking through the jungle, and she finds this beautiful gemstone. And she looks around and doesn't see anyone, so she takes it up, puts it in her bag. And she walks on, and then she stops for lunch a few hours later, and she's stopping for lunch, and she's unloading her bag, and this young traveller, who's obviously in hard times, is a little bit dishevelled. He's obviously struggling. And the young man asks him, "Excuse me, do you have any food you could spare?" And the older woman said, "Oh, of course." And so she goes into her bag, and she lifts out the gemstone, and then she looks, "Here's some bread, here's some cheese, you're welcome." And the young man looks at the gemstone and sees this beautiful gemstone and said, "That is a beautiful gemstone. Can I have that? I don't need the food if I can have that." And the older woman said, "Sure, please take it. I'll wrap it up for you," and just hands it to him. And he walks off. And then he spends that night just looking at the gemstone, and he can't sleep. He's just looking at it, looking at it. He wakes up the next day and says, "I need to find that woman again." So he goes looking for that older woman who gave him the gemstone, and finds her and says, "Oh, I'm glad I found you. I need to give you this back." She goes, "Why are you giving me it back?" She said, "I don't want the gemstone. I want what you allowed you to give me that without hesitancy. I want what you have that gave me that." And I think that's what we often look at, when people give us things, we're like, how can they be so generous? How can they be so kind? And I think that's what we try and do in this religious community. We try and be examples of that generosity, that kindness where we give to one another. And giving without resentment, giving without judgment, giving with that little extra effort, and giving until it feels good. I absolutely hate the expression "give until it hurts." Give until it feels good. If it hurts, there's something wrong about the whole thing. Because I think when we give when it feels good, then it is an expression of gratitude for what we have. And that helps to increase the love in the act. Because when we give with gratitude, then it is an act of love. So perhaps we can be kind and generous, is my conclusion. Yes, I don't think you can be generous without being kind, but I think even with kindness, there's still an act of generosity, because it's a relationship of interdependence and mutuality. And ultimately, what that is community. And Parker Palmer, the great Quaker thinker, said this. He says, "In the human world, abundance does not happen automatically. It's created when we have a sense to choose community, to come together to celebrate and share our common store. When the scarce resource is money or love or power, the true law of life is that we generate more, whatever seems scarce, by trusting its supply and passing it around. Authentic abundance is not found in secured stockpiles of food or cash or influence or affection, but belonging to a community where we can give those goods to others who need them and receive them from others when we are in need. Community doesn't just create abundance. Community is abundance. If we could learn that equation from the world of nature, the human world might just be transferred and transformed. So ultimately, to be generous needs to be done in community, because so much of our economic system talks about scarcity. Ultimately, religious community works in the currency of abundance, and that abundance is created when we come together, creating music, sharing reflections, sharing technology, or sharing the food, the tea, the coffee in social hour. Community creates abundance, and through abundance we can live with gratitude and create more generosity in the world.